Hello, welcome to Beyond Blender. Welcome to part 1 of this retro style electro gun ray thing. So if you like this video, a like and subscribe is appreciated. And with that done, let's jump into part 1. So here we are in Blender. Let's delete these two. Let's start with the front of the model. And to do that, I'm going to be adding a UV sphere. There it is. Right, let's change this to 16 sides or segments. Rings 8. And we want this to be rotated around the x-axis 90 degrees as well. So I'm just putting that back to 16 segments, actually rings, keep calling them segments. So 16 and 16. Let's rotate it 90 degrees on the X, so it's facing left and right. No, I think I will go back to 8. Yeah. I really want to keep these more square faces intact. Let's jump into front view or side view by hitting the 1 and 3 on the numpad and tab into edit mode. And in vertex selection, let's just close that out of the way. There we go. I'm going to select these front vertices and delete those. Just press the delete key in vertices. And these rear ones just there. So now we have a bit of an opening at the front and at the back. So I just turn face orientation off so it don't get that garish red. Of course, right click to shade it smooth. So I want to have 3 parts to this. One at the front, one in the middle, and one towards the back. So I will be slicing this up a little bit more. So I'm going to add some extra loop cuts with Ctrl R along each of the rings there. Then select those new edge loops and then press S for scale and then Shift Y. That's very important. We don't want to scale it in the Y axis, which is the green line you can see going from left to right. You just want to scale them up and down and left and right. So get something like that. That gives us a little bit more topology to work with, of course. So with that done, make one more tweak actually, so a little bit more smoother perhaps. Okay, that's looking good. Now in face mode, I'm going to select some edge face loops. So hold down the Alt key and then Alt Shift to select multiple face loops. So let's select those 2 at the front, 2 in the middle, and 2 at the back. Let's make it 3 actually. I want to keep the consistent, well, not as large a gap at the back there for the glass element. So with that done, oops. Yeah, that's better. Let's keep that gap between the rings consistent. And that'll look nicer. So as I said, with that done, we can now press Shift D to duplicate those faces into separate, and then press P to separate those into a new object. You can see in the outline now we've got sphere and sphere.001. Let's just rename that actually. I'm going to call everything RG initially, and I'll call the first part glass. And then the rings we've just made, I'm going to call those RG glass trim. I thought that was a fairly sensible name. Don't know what else to call it really. Let's just turn off the glass trim there in the outliner. And let's add a solidify modifier to the glass part. Turn off the subdiv for a moment. And we can see how thick we need to make this glass. I'm going to turn wireframe on. And you're going to see me doing this a lot throughout these videos. Wireframe on and off, subdivision on and off, and other modifiers. So let's continue with that, and let's go for 0.025. That looks okay. Even thickness, make sure you tick that on, and I always tick normals, high quality. I don't think it makes a huge difference, but I just like to know that it's ticked. And once we've done that, you can apply the solidify modifier, and make sure you're in object mode, otherwise you cannot apply modifiers. So that looks really cool. Very smooth and easy to work with. So once again, turn off the subdiv. Giving it a final check. That looks good. Let's switch over to the trim element that we've just created. Basically, we want to create some thickness for this as well, but going in the other direction, outwards, not inwards. So once again, add a solidify modifier, even thickness, high quality normals, and you see the, let's just drag that above the subdivision modifier actually. So normally it's -1 there on the offset. You turn that to 1, that will then go outwards. So I'm just going to do that and then enter a value. That looks pretty good. I went with 0.02. And once more apply the solidify modifier. And turn on the subdiv. Now you may have noticed that the edges, or the outer edges, are all being very thin, which we don't want, of course. So I will be fixing that with some supporting edge loops. There's many ways you can do that, but I'll show you the technique I've used on and off throughout this video and the other parts that are coming soon. So I've just turned the shadow on there in the overlays, so we can actually see how far these objects are to each other. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to quickly speed through this, select all of the outer edge loops, just like that. Once you have that, let's go to the item menu there, edges data, mean bevel weight, set that to 1. Make sure it's set to 1, otherwise it won't be as effective. Now we can add a bevel modifier, which we'll drag and place above the subdiv modifier, and change the limit method, excuse me, very important, change it to weight. And under profile, change the shape to 1. All the other settings are fine as they are, as default. So profile shape 1, limit method, to weight. And in fact, I made a mistake here actually. I should have changed segments to 2, not 1. So please make sure you do that. I'll probably come back and fix that later on. So just find a bevel amount that you're happy with. I went with 0.005. Of course, that would depend on the size of the sphere that you created, assuming it's 2 meters, the default size. So with that done, we can see now we have these lovely rounded edges that look really nice. We do have a slight problem in that do the same actually for the glass element as well. So the same thing again, just quickly speed through that, pause the video here if you need to. And as you can see, we still have a gap between the trim and the glass. So I'm going to switch to the side view and probably turn X-ray on, which we'll do in a moment, and just make a few tweaks to these little bits here, so they're a bit closer to the glass. Oops, I missed a couple of edge loops there. Let's just do that as well. Set it the mean bevel weight to 1. We get that lovely rounded soft edge there. That's looking pretty good, but you notice these gaps here. Now you could leave it like that, nothing wrong with it. But I wanted to make sure that nothing was intersecting. You can see there we've got some very, very close geometry, and there's a big gap at the top there on the top end. So let's just fix that. And all I'm going to do here is go into vertex mode. But first I'm going to add an edge loop there, because it's literally a straight line. We want some curvature to that. So as I say, I'm going to go into vertex mode in a moment and select vertex loops. Just scale them up in the y-axis. Sorry, all the axes apart from Y, very important. So again, press S, Shift Y, so we don't scale them left to right on the screen as you look at it from this angle. So I'm going to zoom in here at the top so you can see that gap. So I press S, Shift Y. It doesn't come up in the shortcut annotation at the bottom of the screen. I don't know why it doesn't work, but it doesn't. So I'm going to grab the center vertices now. And again, the same thing, S for scale, Shift Y, or just S in this case because we've only got one edge loop. Now notice there it's not quite working. That's because when I added the edge loop, I only added it to the outside faces and not the inside faces. So I need to go back to our object. I isolate that with the question mark or / key. And there we go, just add an edge loop in the inner ring as well. So let's go back to the side view, edit mode, and select both of these loops. Let's go into edge mode actually. For some reason I can't seem to select these. I think there might be a bug with my mouse, or probably my mouse or something software related. Anyway, S, Shift Y, because now we've got two of these edge loops. And you can see there the gaps now visible between the glass and the trim. That's okay. So I'm going to do the same now for the center part and the rear part. Like I say, you don't have to do this, but you don't want any intersecting geometry at this point, which it may just cause some glitches when you render it. So better to be safe than sorry. So let's see how we go here. It's looking good. I'm just looking for any geometry protruding through the glass. That's why I'm doing that. Although I can't strictly see it yet because I haven't got the glass material on there. So what I'm going to do now is, go into the object properties and go down to viewport display, click on the color. I'm going to set the alpha value to something less than 1, and then you can see in the viewport in solid mode it's acting more like a transparent object. And you can see there at the back, the trim at the back is actually protruding through the glass. We can see that effect now. So as before, go into edit mode, select some vertices or edge loops, and you just want to scale these up. Not just up, but in all the axes apart from the Y. So let's just do that. Just check in there, you can still see a little bit of intersection. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to select those and do it from this view. Oops, I missed the part. There you go. You can see there what's happening. So I'll just do that visually at first and then zoom in to get a bit more accurate. And there you go, that's now fixed the intersection. Excellent. With that done, let's move on to the next part. Another technique I like to do, to use, is to borrow from an existing object. So I could just create a cylinder here and place it next to this and so on. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to select an edge loop from an existing object. I'm going to select that one there. You may not even see it if you select it because it's hidden inside with that geometry, of course. So we've selected that one there. You can see we've got that selected there just to confirm that is selected. And in wireframe you can see it now much clearer. So Shift D to duplicate it, P to separate it into its own object. Then go back to object mode, switch to solid, and there we go. We've now got glass trim 001. So with that done, let's reposition the origin as well. So right click, set origin to geometry. Right click, set origin to geometry. Now we can go into edit mode, select that edge, press E to extrude, and then press the Y key for the Y axis. And we'll just pull that out, something like that. and right click to shade that smooth. And remember, because we borrowed from the other shape, the other model, we've still got the same modifiers applied. So what I've just done there is deleted the bevel modifier. We won't need that just yet. We may need it later, so we can always re-add it. Now it's really important when you extrude edges and all these other things, you may end up with the normals facing the wrong way. So make sure you do turn that on just there, check, and then fix any normal anomalies. Right, with that done, that's looking very clean, of course. It's a very basic shape, of course. So I'm going to snap that back there again. And turn off any of the mean bevel weights that were inherited from the previous model as well. Okay. So in edit mode again, just gonna make it a little bit narrower. Let's just rename that to bridge. Didn't know what else to call it. Let's duplicate that object and rename that to rib. I don't know if these names make any sense. I just had to think of something though, so I wasn't sure what to call them. You call them whatever you like. So with that object now, I'm going to edit mode, and I'm creating some edge loops. As you can see, you just Control R. I've created 2 there. And with those selected, now you can press Control B to create a bevel. Excuse me. It's a very thin bevel, and no cuts, no segments other than one. Something like that is absolutely good. Now you want to select these face loops, so make sure you're in face mode, Alt click, Shift Alt click, and then delete those faces. So now you're just left with 3 rings. Now at the moment it's exactly the same size as the previous one, so let's just move this along in object mode a little bit towards the right there. Set the origin again to the middle. Of course, our other object behind there now is a little bit too short, so I'm going to pull this out. We've got a little bit of a lip on the other side. So I'm going to turn on vertex snapping, and if you hold down the control key, that will invoke the snapping as you're making edits without having to click the icon, leave it on. Now there I've made it the same width effectively as the rings, but I will push that out a little bit further later on. So with the rings selected, the ribs I should call them, add the solidify modifier again, switch the offset to 1, even thickness, normals, high quality as before, and then set a thickness that you're happy with. And switch to the side view. And once again, let's just drag up the solidify and turn on subdivision. And naturally, you can see the problem already. So we need to add more. Apply the solidify modifier, by the way, as we've done previously. So we need to add some more mean bevel weights to these edges. So again, I'll fast forward through these. So like before, select all of the leading edges, just like that, and increase the mean bevel weight, or do this way as well. Add a bevel, make it 2 segments and a profile shape of 1. That will put an edge loop either side of those selected edges. So there's 2 techniques that I've just shown you that you can use. The mean bevel weight option and the beveling itself physically into the model. And we'll shade smooth that as well. That's looking good. Don't worry about the intersecting there, you can see, because I'm not going to see that part of the model inside. It won't be visible, so don't worry about that. I think I've just realized that I need to bring out the inner circle, but actually, yeah, that's a good point. I need to separate these by loose parts. So we've got 3 individual rings now. Rib 1, rib 2, and rib 3. And you may realize the reason I'm doing that is because the inner ring is going to be animated later on, which I will show you how to do. So it helps to have that as a separate object. So I'm just going to set the origins for these back to their roughly the center again. So right click, set origin to geometry. And let's add these spokes. I don't know what else to call them, little protruding things from this ring. So I don't normally model this way, but because they're so small, I didn't want to bother with adding too many modifiers or keeping it really simple. So I just literally built it as you see it. So I kept 16 sides. I might have even increased it actually. Let's just get this done first, and we'll move that up a little bit there. Get roughly what we want. A little bit shorter. Think of that as a little connector at the base of the spokes. So it could be any shape you like. I went for a cylindrical shape. At this point I'm thinking, how complex should I make this? Should I go for minimal geometry and then modifiers, or add a bit more geometry and just model it? These are very simple things, so I decided to go with 16 sides. Let's edit that now and select the top face. Press I for inset. That's I for inset. And bring that into about there. Select the outer edge. Holding down the Alt key and then Control B to bevel it. And again, I'm thinking here whether I should just go for this method, which is the default, which is 0.5 on the shape. So we get a rounded bevel. And you could add more segments there. I went for 2. Let's turn the wireframe off. You can see there actually the wireframe I've added to the quick favorites you can access by pressing the Q key. So you can see there, if you anything in Blender, right click on it and add to quick favorites, then simply press the Q key to access that function. So I use that a lot, but I try to use the menus so you can see where to find those options. So I've deleted the bottom face there, and I'm going to bring that down so it slightly intersects the rib shape, the ring there. I think that might be a little bit too small actually. So in edit mode again, I'm going to select everything by pressing the A key, then press S for scale, and then Shift Z or Z. And that will stop it being scaled in the Z axis. So now we've got that middle face that we created when we inserted it, or did the inset, so I should say. We're going to select that face and then press E to extrude, and that will go upwards, of course. And we can delete that top face, but I don't think we need that. So select it and press delete. There we go. And finally, I'm going to add a sphere at the top of that. So still in edit mode, remember, this will be one shape, one object. So still in edit mode. Let's go to round cube. If you don't see that, just add a UV sphere or an icosphere. I'm going to add a quad sphere at this point. So let's just change the radius. Of course, you can do that in edit mode anyway. Don't have to do it through the menus there. Bring that up. Something like that. A little bit smaller. And next thing to think about are the divisions. Now, do you want to keep 8 on the arc? Or do we go for something a little bit less? Again, I'm kind of deciding, do I want to go low poly, or I can always add a subdivision modifier anyway if I need to. Let's go for 4, 5, 6. It's got to be an even number. Come on, there we go. Back to 8 again. We went all that way for nothing. So I'm going to right click and shade smooth that, of course, in object mode. Going back into edit mode, select the sphere and just make sure it's covering the lip of that vertical bar. You can see it intersecting there, so I just bring it in a little bit. Something like that. That would do. So now we've got one object, which is this spoke. And before we carry on, actually, let's just bevel this edge loop inside there as well. I don't like the way that looks when it's shaded, so I'm going to select that edge loop, Control B, and then just bring that out a little bit with 2 segments. And that's looking better. Shade smooth just in case. Right, so with that done, let's rename this firstly. Now while I'm doing that, you'll notice where the 3D cursor is, which is that little red and white ring with a little crosshair on it. That is in the middle of that ring there. That's really important for the next step. So if it isn't there, select the ring, and press Shift S and cursor to selected. That should place the cursor to that point. And what I've done now is pressed Alt D, not Shift D, Alt D. It's got to be in one operation though. So we want to make sure that our pivot point is set to the 3D cursor. So going back to Alt D again, and then press R to rotate it, and then Y for the Y axis. Hold down Control if you want to get incremental rotation, but you can change it from the menu just here. So I'm going to type in 45, and before you do anything else, just press Shift R a few times, and it repeats that last operation. But it has to be the hold operation. That's why you don't want to click away after you've duplicated it or rotated it. It has to be in one swift operation. Right, let's model the pylon thing. No idea what these names mean, but you get the idea. So I'm going to borrow again from this cylinder just here. So I've copied that edge loop. In fact, I'm going to copy the whole object. There we go. I'm going to move that across. Set the origin to geometry. Do the same for the other one as well. And remember, we've still got the vertex snapping option. So as I do that, I can hold down the Control key and move my mouse pointer to a corresponding vertex point, and it will snap it along that axis that I clicked on, i.e. the arrow, the green one in this case. I'll do that again. I just realized this needs to come out a little bit more. A bit of a gap there. Okay, let's go back to this one now. If I click the green arrow, hold down the Control key, and it will snap to the vertex that I move my mouse pointer to. Excellent. Right, let's go into edit mode with the tab key and press Control R. And we're going to add some loop cuts. And I believe I'm going to add 6. Just like that. And then right click to leave them in place where they're created. You can see there we've got 6. If you didn't get 6, just change the number of cuts in the box there in the bottom left of the screen. Let's go over to face mode. Select these face loops. So Alt click, Shift Alt click. And with that, we can press E to extrude, S for scale, Shift Y. Again, we don't want to scale it left to right, just up and down it, in and out. Something like that. Make them as big as you like. I went with something like this. And yeah, please like and subscribe if you like my content. This is part 1, of course, and there's a few more parts to come to this video, because there's quite a lot of work that was involved in this. So do make sure you're subscribed, you don't miss those. So with that done, I'm going to select just the last 2 rings now and scale them down, and then deselect one of the rings if I can. There we go. And with that one selected, bring it down again so we get a bit of a slope. That's a nice looking shape. Let's turn on the subdiv modifier, and I like that result. I think that's really cool. It looks very pylon-y. Perhaps a little bit too stretched, so I'm going to add a few more edge loops. So let's turn the subdiv off again so we can see what we're doing. So Control R, click, right click, just like that. It's very quick. And do the other side, of course, like that. In fact, later on in the video, I think it's in part 2 maybe, I came back to this and made those inner ones on the protruding parts a little bit larger, just so we get a bit more of a rounded edge to those. I'll add an edge loop here as well to support that final edge there. That will do. And of course, shade smooth with the right click context menu. So that's looking really cool so far. Happy with that. Now I've confessed there's an element of making this up as I went along. I did actually do a sketch before this. I started this video. I've done this twice now. Built this model twice, and this version I prefer over the original that I made. It's very, very similar, but with a few minor differences. This being one of them, but it's only subtle. So I've scaled this part up now in edit mode, just so I can cap off this end here. So you get a bit of, from the side profile, you get a bit of a hill, I guess, like a corner coming out from the other piece that we modeled previously. So not everything's the same height and width. And I'm creating, with that edge loop, I've just pressed E to extrude and S for scale, just to close that gap there. Or you can press F to fill it with the edge selected. And again, I'm going to bevel that. Shape 1, segments 2. To give it a nice highlight catching edge there. Yep, that's looking lovely. So as you can see, nothing too complex here. Just very basic shapes, cylinders, circles, and very basic editing tools. Control B for bevel, inset, extrude and scale. But it's not what you use, it's what you make with it, right? So that's the beauty of Blender. I think for me, it's just exploring what you can do with the tools available to you. Whoops, let me just rename that to... I called it ripped for some reason. There you go. And some of you may have noticed already that looking at the values in under transform on the box on the right, we've got a rotation of 90 degrees on the x-axis. And that's because we started off with that sphere at the beginning, and then that propagated through all the other objects. So everything's got a 90-degree angle rotation on the x. But that's okay, but I'd rather that was reset to 0. So we'll do that later anyway, just to make sure that everything's nice and neat. So I've made this ring now. I'm going to make it approximately the same size as that. It doesn't have to be exact. Again, you could borrow from the ribbed part we just made, like we've done previously. So there's the ring. I'm going to snap that to that ripped part there. Let's go into edit mode actually. Select these and just make that a little bit wider. And set the origin to geometry. Get that in the middle. I've turned X-ray on there, by the way. If you didn't notice, that's why you can see through things there. Let's rename that. Excuse me, rename that to bridge. And bridge 2 actually. Turn X-ray off. Now, I think I missed a bit of a trick here. I need to have a gap there. So we'll come back to that in a bit, but this is me thinking what I'm going to do next, basically. So which bit should I tackle next? The gasket or carry on working down the model? I'm going to move over the 3D cursor somewhere about there. That's under the view context menu or menu on the side there. I'm going to bring it roughly to there. And that tells me I'm now going to work on the gasket or seals, whatever you want to call those. So roughly there in that position. Put that back to 0. There you go. Don't need to worry about that in hindsight. I'm going to take this cylinder just inside there, take that edge, turn on X-ray again. Let's take this edge loop there. In fact, we can probably take the whole object actually. Let's just duplicate that completely and rename it to not that, the other way. There we go. Perfect. Call it gasket. And we're going to jump into edit mode from the side view and scale that in the y-axis. Obviously we can't see it now because it's hidden behind the I've just switched to object mode and moved it to the left. Turn X-ray back on, or wireframe I should say, and scale that in the Y again. So notice the part of the top, we're almost getting a square shape, which is kind of what we want. But it doesn't really matter at this point, as long as it's a thin shape. That's all that's important. So let's select that object again and look at the modifiers now. So we could just create a ring here. So let's add a solidify modifier. I'm going to bring that up, probably later on. Let's change this offset to 1. Even thickness, of course. Normal's high quality. And keep an eye at the top there. The little square is forming. So you want to keep that as square as you can. Because ultimately this is going to be like a very thin ring, cylindrical ring. So the more square it is, the nicer the circle will be once we've subdivided it. So let's also add a bevel modifier. Let's just close that up and bring the subdivision modifier to the bottom of the stack. Of course, Blender takes these in the stack order from top to bottom. That's how it works through those modifiers. Right, let's sort out the bevel. As you can see, that's a bit too aggressive. So you can see there about 0 and then work up from 0. Hold down the shift key, by the way, while you're doing that. That gives you a lot more control over those numbers. If I turn on the X-ray, you can see there we've got this 8-sided cylindrical shape or circular shape. This is kind of what we're after. If we turn subdiv on, that makes it nice and round. So effectively that geometry there, the gasket, is simply just a loop of faces, and the rest of it's done with modifiers. I'm going to leave it like that, because all we need to do then is just copy the faces in edit mode, move them somewhere else, and we've automatically got a gasket. So that's the reason why I did it that way. smoothing these out just a little bit, so we maintain some of that gap between the gasket and the other parts we've just made. A little bit slow getting that done, sorry about that. You can see there's a bit of a gap, which is not good for a seal. So, easily fixed. Let's just turn off these modifiers so we can see what we're doing. In fact, turned off too many. Let's turn them back on. And let's go into edit mode and select everything by pressing the A key and then just S for scale, Shift Y. And we can just make that smaller to see we now close that gap quite nicely. Excellent. What's next? Let's select the gasket. We're going to place it either side of this part here. So let's move this back just a little bit. At the moment it didn't look very interesting like that. Too clean, too boring, not much detail. So by creating this gap we can add a bit more visual interest with the gasket. Now the trick to this part is remember not to scale it in the y-axis, otherwise you get a different thickness of the gasket. You want to keep the same thickness, just basically wider. The diameter gets larger basically. So S for scale, Shift Y, and increase that until you get the gasket. Something like that. Very nice. Now do that again. Shift D to copy that. Move them over. I want to use snapping actually. But it doesn't snap to the center if you notice. Now if we go back to the options here, there's an option for center. Enable that and then do the same thing. Hold down Control and it will snap the center of your selection to the vertex your mouse pointer goes to. I'm going to put that back to closest because that's the one I use most frequently. So there you go. We've got a lovely bit of geometry there. Very simple again. Of course, you can just create a torus and do it that way as well. You can see there that's centered nicely. Great stuff. Right. I'm just giving it a quick inspection again, and I'm going to switch to random colors. This helps to visualize all the separate elements that we have so far. And just to forewarn you, there's going to be a lot of parts to this. So yeah, but you'll see that later on in the other parts. Right, let's make this lovely protruding thing. And I apologize for my naming convention. I think I called this a probe. So I hope nobody has nightmares. So I'm going to add a round cube again, with the option to add a round cube. And from the presets, I've already selected, round cube is already selected. So there we go. Right, let's go to, I think 6 is probably okay. This will definitely need a subdiv modifier, of course. So with that done, let's shade that smooth as well. Let's find that object and quickly rename that. I'm going to call that RG probe, as mentioned. So now what I'm going to do is go into edit mode. Let's isolate it first. So / on your keypad or question mark key, and go to edge mode. And I'm going to select these edges that you can see on this side here. So Alt and then Shift click. Shift Alt click. That's too big actually. Let's select these. What I'm doing here is hitting Shift and then Control on the last edge. That will select everything on the shortest path to the edge. So Shift and then hold down Control and click another edge somewhere else, and it will find the shortest path. Anyway, with that selected, I right clicked and chose the Loop Tools option, Circle. And you will obviously need Loop Tools enabled. It comes with Blender. So head over to Preferences, Add-ons, and enable Loop Tools. And that will enable you to make your selection into a circle. No surprise there, right? Okay. with that edge selected, I've extruded it, and what a mess of the normals. As you can see there, got a mixed bag. So I'm going to select all of these faces by pressing A, and then press Alt N, N for November, and then recalculate outside. That should fix your normals. Let's turn face orientation off and back into edit mode. Select that edge and just S for scale. Make that a lot smaller. Let's come out of isolation mode by pressing the / key again. Now we can see from the side view, the right hand side view. Let's push that back a little bit. Think of that almost like a golf tee, actually. Now I've just realized. Rotate it 90 degrees. That could be your golf ball, and that's your tee. I think that's what they're called, golf tees. But anyway, I'm rambling. Let's extrude that again. Press the Y for the Y axis so it's nice and straight. And just bring it along until it goes roughly in this area here. Somewhere like that. I could have called that a wand, couldn't I? Never mind. Not really a wand though, is it? Anyway, subdivision modifier. Our good friend, let's add that. Let's add 2 levels. And just tighten up some of these edges now. So let's go back into edit mode. It looks a bit too soft. That's fine actually. There's nothing wrong with that, but I'm going to add a few more edge loops. So turn off the subdiv. Select this edge loop here by holding down the Alt key and clicking it. Scale it down a little bit. Let's see how that looks. Not much of a difference, to be fair. I'm happy with that. That looks good. I didn't sharpen those edges up in the end. Let's have a conversation about add-ons, right? I'll get the prompt here. Right, add-ons. As I said, loop tools already, but also extra objects under curve and mesh. Enable those because we'll be using those later on. Loop tools I've already mentioned. That's very handy. Enable that. And finally, ball tools. And I didn't mention it there, but node wrangler as well. You'll need that for the texturing part. Don't need it, absolutely, but it really does help. Right, let's add a really cool, exciting curve. So under curve spirals, let's select our comedian, and we get this. You won't see that actually, that's from my previous testing. It should be like that by default. It looks like a circle, but it isn't, it's lying to you. If we increase the height, you can see it's actually a spiral. And we can increase the turns of that spiral and the steps, which gives it the density and the location and rotation, of course. And also at the moment it's set to poly, which we don't want to be poly right now. We want that to be set to Bezier. But before we do that, let's just tweak this to get something that we like. This part is going to be the wire that comes from where those prongs are to the ball we just made there. So there I'm just changing the height, of course. I rotated it 90 degrees on the x-axis, so it's facing left to right here. And I'm going to zoom in here so we can see it a bit better. We want to get this sine wave look. So let's just change the radius a bit more. It's a bit too large for at the moment. Something like the size of the sphere or a little bit smaller is good. Now the steps, we don't want that much detail. That's insane, we can't work with that. So bring that right down, switch it to Bezier, change it to auto. And if I zoom in here, you should be able to see the handles as you would expect on a Bezier curve. Just like you would find in Photoshop or Illustrator or other drawing packages. Let's decrease the steps again. We really don't want too many points here. Make it easier to work with. And let's fix the height so it gets nice and snug inside there. Something like that. It's looking good. Now one thing to watch out for is you don't want that end point to intersect with that ball. So tweak the height a little bit more, bring that in. leave a bit of a gap because there will be some thickness to this obviously, so leave a gap that's going to be sufficient for the thickness there. Right, with that done, let's go back to object mode, select the curve, and let's quickly rename that actually. Coil, what a great word, let's use that. And there you go, look, there's the rotation on that as well. So obviously we rotated it. So I'm going to apply the rotation. At this point, you can go through and apply all the rotations of all the objects because they all have that 90 degrees rotation on the X, which we don't want. So nice and neat, let's get that done. And going back to the curve, we now have this curve option here, curve properties. We click that, scroll down until you find geometry, open that up, and under bevel, you can increase that, and look at that, just like magic, we have a lovely bit of thickness to our wire. So I'm going to probably make that, I like to round the numbers off to 15 or 10 or whatever. So 15 is good. Let's turn the wireframe off, and goodness me, that's way too dense. That will be not just the resolution, that's the diameter of the curve. And you can see that from a better angle here. You can see there, if we're looking down on it there, you can see we've got 6 sides, which is more than enough for this wire. So I'll put it back to 1, 6 sides is enough. And the other part we need to change is the resolution at the top there, which is by default 12. So just make that something a bit more manageable. Yeah, 2 is good. Perhaps a little bit too thick. I went for 0.0125. Happy with that. Now the next part is, this is a curve as you know, so let's shade that smooth. But we don't want to leave it as a curve, so I'm going to create a new collection. I'm going to call this history, or call it whatever you like. I called it backup previously. Make a copy of this, so Shift D, then drag the copy and drop it into your history collection, and just turn that collection off. That's our backup basically. So getting back to our curve, we're going to convert this to a mesh. So with that selected, just going to check these are all good. Let's fill the caps as well. So in hindsight, we didn't need to do that because it creates a messy fill. Head over to Object, Convert, Mesh. And voila, we now have a mesh object, not a curve object anymore. So that curve option is now gone. Let's add a subdivision modifier, change it to 2 subdivisions for levels, 2 on the render as well. And we have this nasty cutoff at the end there, which it made a bit of a mess of. And it made more of a mess than you realize actually. Fine, you see that in a minute. So let's select these edges and press Ctrl Delete to dissolve them. That didn't work, so I'm going to select these faces. Right, the limited dissolve is the one we wanted. So press Delete and then select from the menu, limited dissolve. And at the back there, we don't need any of those faces there. So let's just select these faces at the end. 1, 2, 3, 4, and press Delete those, just like that. Right, getting back to the front. We want a bit of a neater cap to this, so hit tab edit mode, select both of these faces and press I to inset them. I didn't actually notice at this point that there's more than meets the eye here with this object. There's more vertices here that are just sitting on top of each other. I didn't realize it at the time, but you'll see that evident in a minute. So I've undone that. I made a mess of that. I'm going to switch from global to normal. And with the inset of those faces, you can see it's pointing roughly in the right direction. Just pull that up on that blue axis there. And I thought I was done here, but you can see something doesn't look quite right. I'd even go fast to say it looks a bit funny. Clearly we have some vertices there that are duplicated, so I'm going to select all vertices, right click, merge vertices by distance, and that tidied that up nicely. So there you go, there's our coil done as well. And in fact, this is the end of part 1. Please join me in part 2, where we'll continue to make this lovely object. But for now, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. See you in the next part. Bye.